Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, and we have a massive show ahead for you today. In the second hour, Cenk Uygur will be joining me to give us all an update on a small election that everyone seems to be talking about in New York City. It's actually a huge election. History has been made, and we'll talk a little bit about that mayoral race. A lot of details to get into, including some of the most Islamophobic, disgusting reactions to that election that I've seen probably ever. It's one thing to attack someone because you disagree with their policies. It's something entirely different to accuse someone of pushing Sharia law simply because they're Muslim, but there's no evidence of it whatsoever. It's just incredible. Again, I mean, these types of weird allegations suck the life out of every conversation, every debate that you can have about policy, and it's incredibly frustrating. But we'll talk about the, of course, mayoral race in New York City. That'll be in the second hour. Cenk wants to talk about it with me, so we're gonna have to wait for that story. But we've got a lot of other stories to get to, including a possible financial motive, a conflict of interest that has motivated Stephen Miller to get ICE to ramp up deportations without any concern about potentially arresting and deporting the wrong people. We're also going to give you some updates on Gaza. Actually, I want to start off with that as the first story, and some conflicting intelligence in regard to the effectiveness of the US bombing of nuclear sites in Iran. I think we should be very careful with that story, but I'll give you the details as we know them today. But as always, just want to encourage you to like and share the stream if you're watching us live. You can also support the show by becoming a paying member, tyt.com/join to become one. Members get the whole show for free. That includes the bonus episode. They get access to our archives, meaning they can watch the show whenever they want. And we also engage with our members by reading their member comments, answering their questions, and much more. So tyt.com/join, or just hit that join button if you're watching us on YouTube. All right, I wanted to start off today's show by just reacting to a clip that, or a portion of Piers Morgan's show today. So Piers Morgan, as he always does, had a big panel on his show today. And one of the panelists was actually an Israeli. You may have heard of him. His name's Gideon Levy. And if you know anything about him, you're probably familiar with the fact that Gideon Levy has been willing to be critical about the government of Israel or the Israeli Defense Forces and how they prosecute wars. And he's really a voice that I value, even though I don't always agree with him. When he was on Piers Morgan's show today, I think that he may have been the first Israeli that I heard calling it like he sees it, telling the truth about what's actually transpiring in Gaza as it relates to those humanitarian aid hubs and the dozens, sometimes hundreds of civilians who get shot and killed by the IDF as they are waiting in line, attempting to get access to flour or some humanitarian assistance so they and their families can maybe have a shot at staying alive. Now, with that in mind, take a listen to what Gideon Levy had to say here.
I must remind ourselves that when the UN's agencies distributed the aid, there were no killed people. It all started with this monster organization of putting 2-3 stations in the Gaza Strip for 2 million people, almost as an experiment in human being, in starving human beings. And then comes the question really about the figures. Oh, those propaganda people, they love to speak about figures. Aren't they 1,000 babies less than 1 year killed? No, they know it's only 700 babies killed. Hamas is exaggerating. And if it is 700 babies killed, can we live with it? None of them was killed in purpose, all of them by chance, all of them potential threat to the soldiers. How dare you to spread this propaganda knowing that you are lying? There is a daily massacre in Gaza now. Killing in the sake of killing, nothing but this. The last 2 weeks are horrible because you see the soldiers, you hear the machine guns, you see the people lying on the sand and trying to save themselves. How can you dare to invent all kinds of statistics instead of saying, yes, this is our army. The army got a command now to kill as many Palestinians as possible because that's our goal now. We don't have any other goal in Gaza now.
So that was a powerful moment on Piers Morgan's show today. The other individual that you see in the center of the screen who's kind of shaking his head in denial of what Gideon Levy is saying is a former IDF spokesperson. He was just, rotating the usual talking points that are meant to provide cover for Israel's genocide in Gaza. But Gideon Levy called it like he saw it or sees it. And we also know that there are two previous prime ministers of Israel who at first were supportive of what was going on in Gaza, but lately had no choice but to tell the truth about what's happening because everyone who's willing to be honest sees it. Everyone who's paying attention sees it. And the main reason why I wanted to show that moment featuring Gideon Levy, again, an Israeli who lives in Israel, is because oftentimes when you watch these types of debate shows, the Israeli is like Jonathan Conricus, right? The other former IDF spokesperson that I pretty much lost it on when I went on Piers Morgan's show on Monday of this week. And it's people who seem to care very little, if anything at all, about the humanity of Palestinian civilians. Normal people who are just trying to survive in one of the most atrocious, terrible situations you could ever imagine. Okay, they are living through absolute hell. And I think it's become very clear that the IDF's mission here is not about rooting out Hamas. It's about murdering people, killing people, and eventually whoever remains, displacing them. One other thing that I just want to note about the IDF spokesperson who was on the show. If you have time later today and you want to watch the entire episode of Piers Morgan's episode from today, you'll notice that the IDF spokesperson said that the civilian population of Gaza is 1.5 million. That's a little terrifying. It really is, because is that the civilian population? How many people have actually been killed in Gaza so far? Because at the beginning of this war, there were over 2 million people living in Gaza. In the beginning of this war, we heard that there was somewhat 30,000 Hamas militants, if that. So how did the IDF spokesperson reach the conclusion that there's only 1.5 million civilians living in Gaza? Is it because a higher number that we don't even know about have been slaughtered by the IDF? Are they just making up numbers in regard to how many Hamas militants are in Gaza? What kind of intel does the Israeli military have in regard to who's a Hamas militant? How do they decide whether they're going to shoot and kill someone because they suspect that they're a Hamas militant? There's just a lot of weird, contradictory information coming out from the IDF and the Israeli government. You also have both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump saying that there's 1.7 million Palestinians in Gaza right now. When again, the death toll is allegedly only 60,000. And in the beginning of this war, we kept hearing that the population of Gaza was over 2 million. So I don't know. I think that the death toll numbers that we're getting are undercounted significantly. Bodies that remain buried under the rubble have not been counted in the official death toll numbers. So I guess we're gonna have to wait and see just how many innocent people and civilians have been slaughtered as a result of this genocide that the Israeli military has carried out in the Gaza Strip. But if you pay attention to the various ministers, the various government officials within the government of Israel, they don't even hide it. That's the thing that drives me crazy. In the context of the United States, you get gaslit endlessly about how like, no, this isn't a genocide. No, they're not gonna do ethnic cleansing. While you have government officials flat out saying, we want ethnic cleansing. We want to push whatever remaining Palestinians there are out of the Gaza Strip. We're taking over that land. By the way, we're also going to take over the West Bank, which was governed by a different governing body, not Hamas, but they wanted that land anyway. So they're gonna use what happened on October 7th to just take over both territories entirely, push Palestinians out, especially in the West Bank. I mean, settlers have been forcing Palestinians out of their rightful legal homes for many years now with impunity, with the IDF watching to provide cover, to provide protection for the settlers who have been stealing land, stealing homes from innocent Palestinian civilians who have the right to those homes and the right to that land. But going back to Gideon Levy, I know that you hear wall-to-wall propaganda from Israelis providing cover for the Israeli-led genocide in Gaza. But I don't want you to make the mistake of thinking that every Israeli believes in what the government is doing. They all love it. Yes, I've seen the polling that shows that the majority of Israelis are in favor of what's happening in Gaza. But I do question how much they really know. I do question whether or not they're watching the same videos that we're watching. And even so, there are also wonderful Israelis who have actually been protesting what's been going on in Gaza endlessly. And they put themselves at quite a bit of risk because they become targets for the Israeli government as well. So I commend Gideon Levy for speaking the truth on Piers Morgan's show. This isn't the first time he's done it. And I know that in our audience, we do not at all try to appeal to people who have hatred in their hearts based on someone's identity. But just in case, if anyone was ever under any impression that here at TYT, we support hatred toward Jewish people or toward Israeli civilians. Nah, I'm not about that. But when it comes to systems, when it comes to a government, when it comes to a military, we're talking about something entirely different, entirely different. And so as much as some of these bad faith actors try to smear critics of the Israeli government as so-called Jew haters, that is not true. You have to pay close attention to the words that come out of someone's mouth. If they're being specific about Israeli government policies or specific instances in which the IDF has behaved poorly, then they're obviously criticizing something specific and not the identity of the individuals involved. That's it. So thank you to Gideon Levy. It's about time we heard, someone who's Israeli, go on Piers Morgan and actually tell the truth about what's going on. All right, with that said, I want to talk a little bit about really interesting leak that came out. And I think we should proceed with caution whenever there's leaked intel in regard to Iran, in regard to conflicts in the Middle East, especially when a lot of this intel in the past has gotten us into a lot of trouble. Now, with that in mind, let's get to the story.
The conversion facility, which you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility. We can't even find where it used to be on the map. You can't even find where it used to be because the whole thing is just blackened out. It's gone.
It's wiped out.
It's wiped out. Then we dropped 12 of the strongest bombs on the planet right down the hole in 2 places. Everything underneath that mountain is in bad shape.
When you talk to the people who built the bombs, understand what those bombs can do, and deliver those bombs, they landed precisely where they were supposed to, so it's a flawless mission.
Flawless. You would think they'd do the opposite. You would think they'd want to say, this was an unbelievable success. And the thing that hurts me is it's really demeaning to the pilots and the people that put that whole thing together, the generals. That was a perfect operation.
Moderate to severe, and we believe far more likely severe and obliterated. So this is a political motive here.
The Trump administration found itself defending the effectiveness of their bombing campaign against nuclear sites in Iran today, following a leak from the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency, which claims that the operation set back the Iranian government by just a few months, that it just wasn't as effective as previously thought. Now, I actually side with the administration officials here. I think that this preliminary report that was leaked by a Pentagon staffer should be looked upon with a great deal of skepticism. But with that in mind, let's hear more about what this leaked intel indicated.
Based on a battle damage assessment that was carried out by U.S. Central Command, essentially looking at the images and looking at what was actually damaged, the Defense Intelligence Agency has assessed that the core components of Iran's nuclear program are largely intact, and that Iran's nuclear program has essentially only been set back by months. Now, we presented this information to the White House for comment, and White House Press Secretary Karen Levitt, she did acknowledge the existence of this assessment, but she said in a statement that the administration disagrees with it. She said, quote, "This alleged assessment is flat out wrong and was classified as top secret, but was still leaked to CNN by an anonymous low-level loser in the intelligence community."
Now, again, this preliminary report was leaked to CNN and also to the New York Times. And this report that was done by the Defense Intelligence Agency focused largely, according to the New York Times, on the state of the Fordo plant. And that's the country's deeply buried uranium enrichment facility, which produced the near bomb grade level enriched uranium. If you guys can remember, when we originally covered this story, Iran had managed to enrich uranium to 60%. You need to get it to 90% enrichment in order for it to be at the level necessary to build an atomic bomb or a nuclear weapon. But nonetheless, officials familiar with the intelligence report said that early findings, again, early findings, no one's been on the ground yet. So really, in order to know the extent of the damage to these nuclear facilities, we have to wait to see what happens after an international group goes to inspect the sites and determine just how bad the damage is. But nonetheless, officials familiar with the intelligence report said that early findings showed that the strikes had set back Iran's nuclear program by months. Officials said the strikes sealed off entrances to the facility, but had not led to a collapse, leaving open the possibility that Iran could eventually dig it out. So let's just pause for a second. Really, 30,000-pound bombs didn't cause any damage to the facility? Like, what are we talking about here? I remember prior to the Trump administration making the decision to drop the bombs, there was all this analysis done about whether or not the bombs would even be effective. And the bombs had recently been upgraded or updated in order to be effective for the Fordo facility because of how deeply buried that facility was. Now, let me give you some more of the intel as it pertains to this preliminary report. The reason Iran most likely could still race to a bomb relatively quickly, officials said, is that Iran likely retains much of the enriched uranium and likely has secret nuclear facilities in which to process it further. Now, likely doesn't tell me anything. Obviously, there's a lack of certainty here. Are there other facilities? How is it that we know about some of the facilities and we don't know about the other alleged facilities that might exist? The other thing that's really interesting to me here is, look, there is definitely some indication that they did take the 60% enriched uranium out of these facilities in order to put it in a safe place where they knew, these bombs would not damage them or be impacted by them. There's been some reporting on that seems credible. However, I don't know for sure yet. No one knows for sure yet. And that's really important to harp on here. But let's also talk about where Iran was in their alleged quest to build a nuclear weapon prior to the bombings. So again, you need 90% enriched uranium in order to build the bombs. They had enriched uranium up to 60%. They do not have, or there is no indication, and there was no intelligence to indicate that Iran had restarted the nuclear program, the nuclear weapons program that they had suspended all the way back in 2003. And that was the intel that was shared by Tulsi Gabbard, head of the DNI, Director of National Intelligence. So there was no indication that they had started building a weapon or that they had restarted their nuclear weapons program that was suspended back in 2003. The other thing is, it's one thing to build a nuclear weapon. You also need to have a mechanism in which you would deliver said nuclear weapon. They don't have that type of mechanism. There's no indication they've worked on that type of mechanism. They were nowhere close to building a nuclear bomb before these bombings took place. Now, if you think 30,000-pound bombs didn't do damage to these facilities, especially after you see satellite imagery showing you the damage, you're falling for pro-war propaganda, if you ask me. That's my belief. I also think usually when a staffer at the Pentagon leaks preliminary intel, there's a motive behind it. You really have to ask yourself, what is the motive here? Because remember, as we know, this war in Iran, the war that Israel was trying to goad the United States into, really didn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. The narrative switched to regime change war real quick. And as we also know, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel has been warning about Iran obtaining a nuclear weapon in weeks, until he was interviewed by Bret Baier last week and admitted that building a nuclear weapon was maybe a year to 3 years away. Okay. Look, I don't think it was about the nuclear weapon. That's why we kept hearing about a regime change war. And now it appears that a regime change war is not on the horizon. And oh, wow, suddenly there's preliminary intel being leaked from the Pentagon. You know, the same federal government entity that can't pass a single audit. Okay, the government entity that hasn't seen a war doesn't love. So just something to keep in mind. Now, Israel produced their own intelligence, and I'll do it with scare quotes, intelligence that, of course, mirrors this preliminary report that was leaked to CNN and the New York Times. I think it should be ignored. They have a serious conflict of interest here. Obviously, they want to go to war with Iran specifically to change the regime there. They want the Ayatollah gone, either by assassination or other means, and they want to essentially install the son of the Shah that was exiled from Iran during the revolution in the late 1970s. So luckily though, and I honestly didn't think I was gonna say this, but luckily Trump rejected Israel's intel as well, and you're about to hear him do that right now.
Thank you, sir.
You should really say how great our soldiers and our warriors are.
I think everyone appreciates our soldiers and our warriors. I do have two questions for you, Mr. President. You just cited Israeli intelligence on these attacks. Earlier, you said US intelligence was inconclusive. Are you relying on Israeli intelligence for your assessment of the impact of the strikes?
No, this is also Iran made the statement. And it's also, if you read the document that was given, that Pete can talk about if you'd like, the document said it could be very severe damage. But they didn't take that. They said it could be limited or it could be very severe. They really didn't know other than to say it could be limited or it could be very, very severe. And you didn't choose to put that because it was very early after. Since then, we've collected additional intelligence. We've also spoken to people who have seen the site, and the site is obliterated. And we think everything nuclear is down there. They didn't take it out.
Okay, so everything Trump said there was actually true except for that very last sentence. And I want to be honest and accurate with you guys, right? So again, there is some indication that the Iranians had moved the enriched uranium. We don't know for sure yet. I'm not saying that as if it is definitely true, but you know what he was saying earlier about the preliminary report and how the media seems to avoid harping on the entirety of the statement, meaning the damage could be limited or it could be extensive. They tend to leave the extensive part out of the preliminary report, which I think is hilarious and kind of tells you there seems to be this like orchestrated effort to like continue goading the Trump administration into a war with Iran, which I think would be a disastrous situation for the Middle East, of course, and it would be disastrous for our own country when we should be focused on other things. There were other Trump administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who tried to pour cold water on this preliminary report. He says that you can't do a nuclear weapon without a conversion facility, meaning a facility to convert uranium to enriched uranium. We can't even find where it is, where it used to be on the map. The whole thing is blackened out. It's gone, it's wiped out. But there's also some dissent that isn't really being talked about at all within the defense and intelligence community on how effective these bunker buster bombs were. So more importantly, the intel that was leaked was preliminary. I know I keep repeating that, but I want to really harp on it. And we should be asking why someone would leak it before investigators are able to complete their assessment in the first place. Again, it's preliminary. They haven't finished their investigation. So the person who leaked this, why did they leak it? What is their motivation? The analysis of the damage to the sites and the impact of the strikes on Iran's nuclear ambitions is ongoing and could change as more intelligence becomes available. Plus, international inspectors and nuclear experts agree that the extensive damage to the conversion facility created a key bottleneck in the weapons making process and agreed that rebuilding it would likely take years. So I hate being in a position where I have to give someone like Marco Rubio any credit at all, but what Marco Rubio said there in the quote that I read earlier is true. And the same report noted that the conversion facility was severely damaged. Again, that same report noted that the conversion facility was severely damaged. They concluded it will be a long time before Iran comes anywhere near the capability it had before the attack. Now, for those who want to believe some preliminary leaked intel from some motivated staffer with an agenda over at the Pentagon, I guess have at it. Seems like you probably want to go to war with Iran, even if it's not in the best interest of anyone, including, by the way, Israel. Like this idea that it's going to go well for Israel is hilarious. It didn't go so well when it comes to Iraq, did it? But nonetheless, Joe Scarborough, of all people, had a warning. And I think it's worth listening to. Take a look.
We also have to be cautious about being played by people inside the intel community who want to get their message out. I'm not saying that's happening here, but I remember in the last Trump term, the New York Times runs a story on the front page. Somebody from the intel community said Vladimir Putin was paying for hits against US troops in Afghanistan. Everybody ran with it. About 6 months later and said, well, actually, they just had a low degree of confidence in that. That's happened an awful lot.
This story, I mean, save it, bookmark it, because it's maybe one of the only examples of me having to give credit to people I usually vehemently disagree with. You got Marco Rubio, you got Trump, and in this case, you also have Joe Scarborough. Joe Scarborough is correct. And in fact, I myself had forgotten about that whole hoax that was reported in Trump's first term regarding Vladimir Putin, paying assassins to take out US troops. That ended up being debunked. So for the mainstream legacy journalists out there and reporters out there, please, for the love of God, just try for once in your life to not be a stenographer for the Pentagon. Just because something was leaked to you doesn't mean that you should just regurgitate it without any skepticism at all. Now, again, we don't know what the reality is. It's a preliminary report. Investigations have not been concluded in any way, shape, or form. And everything to me points in the direction of this is being leaked and the Israeli intelligence mirrors the leak because war is wanted, okay? And I don't want war. The American people don't want war, as you saw from the polling that we shared with you recently. You had Harry Enton showing that most Americans, vast majority of Americans, do not want to go to war with Iran. They also don't want Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. But I'll end on this. If you don't want any country to obtain a nuclear weapon or to build a nuclear weapon, the worst way to prevent them from building said weapon is to publicly and incessantly talk about how you want regime change in their country, going to war with that country, because all that's gonna do is encourage said country, in this case Iran, to race for a nuclear weapon. Because what is a nuclear weapon, really? Now, do I think Iran is actually gonna drop a nuke on Israel? No, I don't. Do I think Iran, if they had a nuke, would drop it on the United States? No. You wanna know why? Because nukes are a deterrent. When you have a nuke, countries are less willing or likely to mess with you. And Israel wants to mess with Iran. There's no question about it. Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted regime change in Iran forever, for literally decades, going back to the 1990s. However, I would like to live in a world where there are no nuclear weapons. We don't live in that world. In this scenario, you have two countries that have nukes. Obviously, the US does, and so does Israel. Iran is not an irrational country. As much as I don't like the Ayatollahs, as much as I do not like that regime and would love for the people of Iran organically to have a revolution that has that ends with the type of leadership that they want and they deserve. I don't think that the current Iranian regime is irrational enough to drop a nuclear weapon on the US or Israel, because that is mutually assured destruction. The 90 million people would perish, gone. You think there wouldn't be any retaliation for that? And you think Iran doesn't know that? The only way to prevent Iran, in my opinion, from building a nuclear weapon is to engage diplomatically. Diplomacy is the only way. You had inspectors going into that country under the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, to inspect and ensure that they were not enriching enough uranium to build a nuclear weapon. They were following the terms of that deal perfectly. That's not based on inspectors just from the United States. You're talking about inspectors in a group of international inspectors. You have European countries, you have Russia, you have all these countries joining in on this JCPOA. Diplomacy is the only way. War or threats of war is only going to persuade, Iranians to maybe speed up toward a nuclear weapon so they don't have to worry about other countries coming in and messing with them. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want them to have nuclear weapons. But it is rich that the country that's currently carrying out a genocide in Gaza is the country that has nukes, is not part of the non-proliferation agreement, and has the audacity of bullying other countries and determining whether other countries should be allowed to have the same weapons they have. Something to think about. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Welcome to our social break of the day. First social break of the day. Art Guy writes in our members section and says, hell yes, more of this from Israelis, please, in regard to Gideon Levy calling out the IDF in its mass slaughter of desperate Palestinians who are attempting to get food from these humanitarian aid hubs. Yes, and by the way, I came across a video just yesterday on YouTube that I was really happy to see. And I hate that this doesn't get much coverage. I think I want to do a better job covering these Israelis, because there are Israelis who have been, protesting what the IDF is doing at the border with Gaza. And so there are wonderful people in that country. I don't want anyone to think that it's just a monolith of, genocidal thoughts and desires of destruction. No, that is not the case at all. The government of Israel is a huge, huge problem. And yesterday when Candace Owens was on Piers Morgan's show and she was like, why don't we call for a regime change in Israel? She was being tongue in cheek, but honestly, the leadership of Israel is destroying that country. It's not just that they're engaging in genocide, which is bad enough, but what Netanyahu and the far-right government of Israel is doing is they're turning Israel into a pariah. And the real question is, do the majority of Israelis like that? Do they want that? I know that they don't like Benjamin Netanyahu, but replacing Netanyahu with someone similar is also not the right solution. So we'll see what happens, but this is not looking good for Israel either. And hopefully the people of that country realize that. Irish Fiddle Dragon says, Hexit looks desperate. Actually, they all look like they accidentally hit the baseball into the neighbor's window and are trying to deny it, except the opposite of that. They did look defensive. I mean, look, I would be defensive too when there's like a leak, when investigations are still ongoing, and the leak is, it appears it's meant to goad the US into more war with Iran. So I don't really blame them for being defensive about that. Boomer Dragon Cat says they will bulldoze and cement over Gaza before we ever get a true count, as if 1 million deaths is worse than 100,000. One death is always too many. I agree with you, Boomer Dragon Cat. We don't know what the actual death toll is at the moment. There are some independent studies that have been coming out recently. One study says that the actual death toll is 75,000. There was also some work done over at Harvard that we were initially going to share with you, but we didn't feel good about the numbers. Like, we didn't feel confident enough to share that with you. So we're going to wait to make sure that it's accurate before we report it. But yeah, I mean, if we could have some journalists allowed into the Gaza Strip to do some reporting, that would definitely help. But Israel has banned them, and they continue to slaughter the remaining journalists who are in the Gaza Strip, most of whom, of course, are Palestinians. All right, let's go to AJ Nestor in our Twitch community, who says it seems impossible after all this bombing that deaths aren't in the hundreds of thousands. We'll see. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Just want to read a few super chats from the last segment that I did. So starting with Romulus 463, when I list 3 of the 5 things that destroyed every empire in history: unchecked immigration, growing welfare state, declaring moral standards, I'm labeled as a right winger by the left. Well, I mean, Romulus is pretty right wing. It's pretty right wing. I'm just keeping it real. But you know, those are issues that should be debated. And to be quite frank, right now, in the context of the United States, I don't want to hear anything about how, oh, the welfare state's the problem and we need to further nickel and dime the American people, when there is no debate about spending tens of billions of dollars on bombing another country. There was no debate. I mean, as you all know, that bombing happened of those, Iranian nuclear facilities without any conversation. Congress didn't approve it, so there was no debate. But more importantly, we were all surprised by it because it was announced after it was already done. So when it comes to war, never a debate. Okay, when it comes to military spending, defense spending, never a debate. And we're talking about, in the case of defense spending, close to $1 trillion a year at this point. Obviously, you have to be able to balance a budget. So if you have a situation like Venezuela, for instance, where you don't have a diversified economy, when all of your economy is based on exporting oil, well, when oil prices drop, you're not able to afford the social programs that you have in your country. That was a big miscalculation in Venezuela. But in the case of the United States, to say that we are overspending on, on our social safety net, I think is a little ridiculous. But I hear what you're saying. I don't want to get too sidetracked, even though I've spent too much time talking about your comment. Romulus also says declining moral standards, I blame autocorrect. So that was a correction from the previous comment. And Land of the Free, home of my rants, says huge congrats to Zohran Mamdani, making history as New York City's first Muslim mayor. A true victory for diversity, justice, and grassroots power. The city chose progress, salam, and solidarity. Make America, America again. Love it. We're going to talk about that with Cenk in the second hour, so stay tuned for that. For now, I'm going to do one story real quick, and then we're going to take a break. So let's get into it.
Mr. President, do you think deportations should focus on criminals or all people who are here illegally?
Should start focusing on criminals, and that's what we've been focused on. Very bad criminals, dangerous criminals.
But Stephen Miller said to go out and arrest every person who's here illegally. He's told ICE to arrest everyone who's here illegally. Do you agree with that?
Stephen and I have a very good understanding. He's a terrific person. We have a great understanding.
Stephen Miller, definitely not a terrific person. And now reporting indicates that based on his disclosures, financial disclosures, he might have some pretty significant conflicts of interest as it pertains to his personal investments and what he's currently doing as part of the Trump administration. So, as we all know, and thanks to the Wall Street Journal doing some excellent reporting on this, these ICE raids have really ramped up beginning in early June. And part of the reason why is because Stephen Miller specifically told ICE, listen, you guys are not meeting the numbers that we want. So we want you to go for the low hanging fruit. We want you to go to Home Depot parking lots, find the day laborers. They tend to be undocumented, round them up, arrest them. We're going to deport them. We want to increase our numbers. Well, now it turns out that it might not just be about Trump wanting to beat Obama's deportation numbers, Obama, the deporter in chief, as he was called. And to be fair, Trump is definitely very competitive and wants to beat Obama's numbers. I don't deny that at all. But for Stephen Miller, there's something personal and financial involved as well. And that has to do with his investment in Palantir, which is very, very much involved in our deportation schemes here in the United States. So according to ethics disclosure reports released by the White House, Miller owns between $100,000 and $250,000 worth of stock in Palantir, which of course is Peter Thiel's data and intelligence software company that has several lucrative contracts with immigration and customs enforcement to track data and conduct surveillance on undocumented immigrants and soon American citizens. We've covered that. We'll continue covering that as that story develops. But nonetheless, Miller isn't the only one in the Trump administration with investments or stock in the company, but he does have the largest stake. Miller's investment could pose a severe conflict of interest, obviously, especially since Palantir has had close ties to ICE, by the way, dating as far back as the Obama administration. And I'm not doing this like both sides thing, but we also have to be real about the Democrats, because the Democrats, they're different from the Trump administration in that they don't make a big show of the deportations that they engage in. But I went back and read stories from the Obama administration about how he had no problem separating. He had no problem separating families. If the children were born here in the US, they could stay here because obviously they're citizens, but he would deport the parents all the time. And it's amazing to me that the same Democrats who obviously are pointing to the cruelty that we're seeing on the streets right now with these ICE raids, they totally gave Obama a pass. They didn't freak out about what Obama was doing. So we need to hold government officials, politicians, presidents accountable regardless of their party. Otherwise, you're just a hypocritical person, okay? Now, with that in mind, let me give you some more on what we've learned about Stephen Miller's financial disclosures. So Palantir, I should note, received a $41 million government contract back in 2014. This is during the Obama administration, and created custom software for ICE, referred to as investigative case management. Now, deportations have escalated pretty quickly following Miller's directive to ICE officials in early June. But months earlier in April, this is super important. So just months earlier, ICE awarded Palantir another $30 million contract to create tracking software aimed at providing the agency with near real-time visibility into migrants engaging in self-deportation. According to documents obtained by Wired, one of the core functions of the program, dubbed Immigration OS, very creative, would be to streamline and prioritize selection and apprehension operations of illegal aliens. And I'm reading that verbatim. So Reuters reports that this is the largest single federal contract that Palantir has been able to secure from a federal government agency, in this case, ICE. And Don Fox, who's the former acting head and former general counsel of the Office of Government Ethics, has outlined a possible scenario illustrating how Miller could cross an ethical line if Miller was in a meeting involving DHS officials talking about whether the data analytics capability of DHS needs to be improved or changed in some way, knowing full well that Palantir would be the beneficiary. And if Palantir is going to be the beneficiary, well, the value of your shares are going to increase. This is why having government officials, whether we're talking about members of Congress or members of Trump's cabinet or any presidential cabinet, investing in individual stocks is such a problem because it does create a conflict of interest. Now, look, Stephen Miller absolutely hates immigrants. He doesn't hide it. I think he would do what he's doing right now, regardless of his investments in Palantir. So I don't want to give him some sort of weird pass by saying, oh, his heart's not into it, but he's thinking about his pocketbook. So he's going to push for this terrible, cruel immigration policy simply because he wants to make money. No, I think in this case, yeah, of course he wants to make money, but he also gets to carry out the types of, in my opinion, cruel, disgusting policies that are currently being carried out right now with these ICE raids. And again, I mean, obviously, there's widespread support for deportations when it comes to Trump voters. But what we're really talking about here in terms of Trump losing favorability on immigration is that fragile coalition he was able to build in the last election cycle. That included independents, that included lifelong Democrats who were just so sick and fed up with Democrats, they decided to switch parties and take a chance on Trump. Those people are not very supportive of these types of immigration policies. They were under the impression that Trump was going to focus on criminals, meaning people who had committed violent crimes, had been convicted of said crimes, and were going to be deported. They were supportive of that. But when we're talking about street vendors, when we're talking about, day laborers, when we're talking about unmarked cars that have ICE agents in plain clothes, just snatching people up in broad daylight from the streets. Let's just pause and think about that for a second. Can you imagine ICE agents? You don't know they're ICE agents. Okay, plain clothes, no identification. Sometimes they're even wearing masks. Can you imagine them busting through your workplace and just detaining people and arresting people? How terrifying is that? And that is what's happening right now. And if Trump is under any impression that this isn't hurting him politically, he's got another thing coming. If Republicans think this isn't hurting them politically, they've got another thing coming. Because people don't want to live in a terrorized world like that. Okay, even if they have a problem with Biden's immigration policies, doesn't mean that they wanted to swing all the way to what Stephen Miller is now pushing ICE to do. Now, ICE, I should say that Miller's investments have definitely paid off quite a bit. So Palantir Technologies has been the top performing S&P 500 index stock over the past year. Shares of Palantir have risen over 92% year to date. Moreover, shares have gained 490% just in the past year. So you've got conflicts of interest. You've got a pretty scummy guy who's hated immigrants forever and isn't afraid to be vocal about it. And you have people getting targeted in their workplace, snatched up by plainclothes ICE agents who aren't identifying themselves. It's just a complete and utter disaster. And to know that there are people making a lot of money out of this really grosses me out. But that's the reality, and you should know about it. All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we've got a lot more news to get to, including a whistleblower who shares some insight about the directives coming from the Trump administration as it pertains to deporting people. Can't wait to share that story with you. Come right back. Okay, Romulus writes back again And I totally agree with you here, Romulus. So the other two things that bring down empires, endless wars and out of control spending. Yeah, I agree with you. And look, there's some people who believe in modern monetary theory, meaning whatever, we print our money and we're like the world's currency. So who cares? Like the debt doesn't matter. Okay, then why are we spending $1 trillion to service our debt? And also, not a good sign when Moody's lowers your credit rating because of how out of control our debt really is. So I am actually worried about our nation's debt. I am worried about us wasting more resources on wars that we shouldn't be fighting. So point taken, Romulus. Thank you for writing in. I always appreciate your insight. Land of the free home of my rant says, if the United States is the world's most powerful nation, why didn't Trump and defense officials hold meetings at the UN or international organization? Instead, they chose to blow everything up on while world faced by listening to they decided to blow up the Iran nuclear facilities by listening to Satan Yahoo. Looks like Iran now has every reason to go nuclear, and the consequences may land elsewhere, hoping for peace in these tense days. As for those 128 who shielded Trump, history's watching. I don't know what you mean by that very last part, but I mean, look, if you want to know, I mean, look at what happens at the UN Security Council every single time they want to sanction Israel for what's happening in Gaza. The US has veto power, so the US just vetoes the vote, even though every other country votes in favor of, ensuring that there's consequences for Israel. It's amazing. So the US is the problem here. We continue to allow for the bad behavior, the genocidal behavior that we're seeing Israel engage in. Schrodinger's Dragon says, Anna Wednesdays. She always devotes a lot of time to prepare and is excellent at delivering the real unbiased news. Kudos to all the producers. Thank you. Even Bart, respect his talent and humor. Best team in the world. And I mean that, okay? So it's not just me, everyone on the team takes what we do seriously. We wanna make sure we have accurate information for you. In fact, the death toll story that I was kind of hinting at earlier, the reason why we didn't do it is because our producer, Kate, looked into it and she didn't feel good about it. And if we don't feel confident in the information and the data, we're not going to share it with you. We wanna make sure it's as accurate as can be. And if we get something wrong, we're going to correct our errors. It's really important. I have an error I wanna correct when we come back, actually. We'll be right back. Welcome back to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And during our social break, one of our viewers in the super chat section was giving the main show team props for the research that we do and how thorough we try to be in sharing stories with you all. And I mentioned how important it is to me for us to correct our errors if we get something wrong. So what I'm about to share, I don't think was necessarily an error in like getting a fact wrong. It was more a perspective that some in the audience didn't share with me. And now I actually agree with the audience members who didn't agree with me at the time. So if you guys can remember, during the presidential election, Congresswoman Nancy Mace was on CNN, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, she was on a panel and she said Kamala Harris's name incorrectly. Now, the accusation was that she was doing it on purpose. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt because I heard so many people say Kamala instead of Kamala. And it's not because they're bad people or they're intentionally trying to mispronounce her name or they're racist. It's a different name. It's a unique name. Seeing how Nancy Mace has been behaving, especially in recent months, I've changed my mind. I think she did it intentionally. I think she got a rise out of it and it was gross. So for everyone who disagreed with me, I've now changed my mind. I wanted to mention that. Okay. Let's get to our next story. There's more to get to when it comes to the Trump administration and their immigration policies, including this.
Bro, these ICE raids are nuts, man. Watching this protest on television, it's like
Do you think the raids are nuts?
All of it's nuts.
Yeah, I think both sides are taking it a little too hard.
Well, I don't think the Trump administration, if they're running and they said, we're going to go to Home Depot and we're going to arrest all the people at Home Depot, we're going to go to construction sites and we're going to just like tackle people at constructions. I don't think anybody would have signed up for that. They said, we're going to get rid of the criminals and the gang members first.
Well, not only is the Trump administration doing the opposite of what they promised, they are not only focusing on criminals and gang members, they are in fact doing ICE raids at Home Depot parking lots at the direction of Stephen Miller, who wants to increase the number of people getting deported. You also have a whistleblower who's now coming out and sharing that Trump's own Justice Department is making, he was in Trump's Justice Department, but he's making the allegation that they were essentially told to ignore the courts. I'm not kidding. So let me give you all the details on this. So again, this is a whistleblower at Trump's own Justice Department making the stunning allegation. The whistleblower's name is Erez Ruveni. Now, he is the Trump administration lawyer specifically who admitted that Kilmar Abrego Garcia was deported mistakenly. Now, according to Ruveni, Principal Associate Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove said the Trump administration's deportations should be carried out regardless of any court orders preventing them. That's a pretty big revelation. And I'm not okay with that. We have a system of checks and balances. Even if the executive branch doesn't like a ruling from our judicial branch, if you believe in our Constitution, if you believe in our system of government, you must abide by that decision or appeal it and go through the process. But according to Ruveni, that is not what the direction was. So in March, Bove allegedly stated in a meeting that the Trump administration was about to carry out deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. Bove indicated these removals were a priority for the administration and stressed to all in attendance that the planes needed to take off no matter what. And indeed, we had shared a story with you indicating that after a federal judge had told the Trump administration that they are not to send a flight of immigrants to El Salvador, they did it anyway. And they're like, oh, too late. They're in midair. Sorry. So just totally ignoring what our judicial branch is ordering the executive branch to do in that case. Now, and if a court order were to try and stop the deportations, Bove stated that the DOJ would need to consider telling the courts FU and ignore any such court order. Now, Ruveni also stated that he was instructed by the Trump administration to refer to Kilmar Abrego Garcia as a terrorist, but he refused to do so because he was not aware of any evidence indicating that Abrego Garcia was a terrorist. There was nothing to back up that claim, so he refused to do it. Now, the Trump administration denies Ruveni's allegations, but interestingly enough, Bove was at a House hearing today, and you're about to watch Senator Adam Schiff ask some important questions. Let's see what Bove had to say.
Senator, I have no recollection of saying anything of that kind. To the extent I
Wouldn't you recall, Mr. Bove, if you said or suggested during a meeting with Justice Department lawyers that maybe they should consider telling the court, it seems to me that would be something you'd remember unless that's the kind of thing you say frequently.
Well, I've certainly said things encouraging litigators at the department to fight hard for valid positions that we have to take in defense of our clients.
And have you frequently suggested that they say you and ignore court orders? Is that also something you frequently do, such you might not remember doing it on this occasion?
No, and as I explained, I have never directed.
So did you or did you not make those comments during that meeting?
Which comments, Senator?
You really need me to repeat it? Did you suggest, as Mr. Ruveni wrote, that DOJ would need to consider telling the courts you and ignore any such court order?
I did not suggest that there would be any need to consider ignoring court orders. At the point of that meeting, there were no court orders to discuss.
Well, did you suggest telling the courts you in any manner?
I don't recall.
To me, it seems like he did. When you say I don't recall, it's a way of avoiding perjuring yourself, but also you're not telling the truth. Like, you don't have to tell the truth. I don't recall. It's like the weaselly tactic that a lot of bad actors engage in when they're asked these tough questions. And look, there are huge consequences for everyone when these deportations happen without due process. People get so mad about that. I get it. I know that if you're here in the country and they're setting you up for deportation, you're not necessarily going to get a trial case. I get that. But you should be able to get a court hearing, an opportunity to defend yourself, because guess what? If you don't have a process of due process, people are going to mistakenly get deported. And that's what happened to Abrego Garcia. And by the way, that has happened literally to US citizens that were mistakenly deported. In fact, Time Magazine published a piece today that is fascinating, something that we should all know about. So less than 6 months into President Trump's second term, courts have directed his administration to bring back at least 4 people that they've deported. In the latest example, a court of appeals ordered the federal government to facilitate the return of Jordan Salmiran, who was deported to El Salvador in May, just 30 minutes after the same court issued a stay of removal, according to court documents. It seems to back up the claims that we're hearing from Ruveni, the whistleblower. The federal government said his deportation occurred because of a confluence of administrative errors. You know, a good way to mitigate administrative errors is to have a system of due process and to actually value that system of due process. Give the individuals who are set for deportation an opportunity, a hearing before a judge to make their case. Because who's to say the federal government doesn't make a mistake and accuse you of being an undocumented immigrant when you might be a citizen or someone who's in the country totally legally? Shouldn't you at least get an opportunity to prove yourself, to make your case? Shouldn't you get an opportunity to say, hey, look, the federal government's making a mistake here. Maybe it's a case of mistaken identity. Who knows? But these are people's lives. These aren't games. We're not talking about stuffed animals here. We're talking about human beings, whether they're in the country under protected status, whether they're American citizens. These mistakes keep getting made. And like, the carelessness about it is enraging. Because if you as an American are okay with the erosion of rights for undocumented people, that means you're okay with the erosion of your rights because it affects you as well. There's more. I mean, the federal government, again, said that the deportation of the gentleman I was referring to earlier, confluence of administrative errors. In the order, judges cited the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. I mean, it goes on and on, but at least 4 different people the courts have said need to come back to the States because they were either mistakenly or illegally deported out of the country. Because when you don't care about human beings and all you care about is increasing your deportation numbers to engage in shadow boxing or this like made up pretend competition with the deporter in chief, President Barack Obama. I mean, the people who lose out in the end is everyone, literally everyone, whether you're an American citizen or you're here in the country under some other status, right? Either you're undocumented, protected status, green card, whatever it is. You have to protect rights. Rights matter. Due process matters. Having the ability to defend yourself in court matters for all of us. That is a right that makes this country great. And to see that being eroded right now in real time is infuriating, to say the least. So I commend Ruveni for being the whistleblower that he is and came out, told the truth about what Beauvais saying behind the scenes. And I would like to see Democrats try to do a little more than just engage in performative Senate hearings. I'm glad that they're having the hearing, but let's follow up the hearing with some action. I mean, we have not been able to rely on Congress for anything during any administration, but certainly during the second Trump administration. We've been relying on the courts, and luckily the courts have been doing their jobs. But hearing that people keep getting mistakenly deported is, again, infuriating, and it should be infuriating for everyone. All right, we should take a break. When we come back, we've got more, including Cenk Uygur.
What contributions to the progressive cause are you most proud of? I mean, I don't have super high aspirations for a singular role that I can play in the movement or anything. I try to present myself as what I think that I am, which is a progressive man who is driven by I think, well-interrogated and well-organized system of values that I try to stay consistent on, and I demonstrate that that's the sort of life that a person can lead and be successful and be happy and all of that. And that should not need to be done, but there are so many people on the right that are trying to push men in the opposite direction that I want to be able to do that. Along the way, if I can get people to care about some topics that they wouldn't necessarily care about, or that for some men they might think that's not a topic that they should be focused on, that's definitely something that I relish doing. And along the way, I mean, we've been able to introduce people to a lot of candidates. That's been a big part of what we've done. You know, not all of them necessarily got in office. Probably most of them did not. And a lot of them you might not even remember their names. But it was great to be able to provide people the platform where they had the chance of, you know, making a difference. Obviously AOC and all that, but there's been a lot of great people along the way.
In the bonus episode for the members, we do some inside baseball. We're gonna look at John's desk. Nice little spaceship here. Nerd. But it is kind of look cool. Who has Legos? Oh no. He's taken apart a keyboard. Who has a mouse pad that's this big? He's got a dog with a nose that you could hang something on. You know what this desk screams to me? Nerd. And that's how we like him. We love Johnny Pie. He's got his own personality like everybody does at TYT. Come meet us all in the bonus episodes. TYT.com/team.
David Soror.
Dr. Phil.
It's Adam Green drop by.
Charlemagne.
Congressman, great to have you. It's great to be with you, Cenk.
Your show is a great thing. You're informing people. A lot of the shows that I live on, you know, my CNN, my MSNBC, and even Fox, and any of the other shows, NPR, they are so quick to decide that they know what this building means today.
The one thing that I hate that politicians do, you know, they talk about the people they should be talking to.
Do they have any idea that they're the establishment and that they're hated, or do they not realize that at all?
People are so deeply in their little universe. I think it's very easy to not really question what you're doing.
Voters have a right to ask questions of any nominee, whether they're independent, Republican, or Democrat.
The system is duopoly that suppresses competition.
How is it the year 2024 and we're still like, maybe they'll talk about paid medical? Like how is that like at one level it's like, look at what we're talking about now. You're like, it's 2024.
And that's always been the critique, that your critique of us is, well, you guys give good speeches, you put out good tweets, but you're not wielding actual power. Now we're starting to.
Yes. Congratulations on all your success. You guys are everywhere. It's about a country and a principle, and that's what you and I both work to achieve. And I'm so glad that at least half the battle has now been won.
If you want to go really hear what's going on honestly, you should tune into the Young Turks.
Thanks for doing such a great job. Please keep it up. Hang tough.
Yeah.
That makes me so happy.
Oh, I like making you happy.
I didn't thought
This is a happy Anna Kasparian.
What's up?
You're welcome, YouTube.
Join the Dragon Squad by becoming a YouTube channel member. Click the join button below or sign up on tyt.com/join to get access to fun emojis, a member-only chat, exclusive shop TYT designs, ad-free watching, and so many other amazing perks. Plus, you get bragging rights for being part of the coolest community on the internet and help us drive real positive change in the world. The Dragon Squad awaits, so join today.
All right, welcome back on the Young Turks. Cenk Uygur, Anna Kasparian. How you all doing? Yeah, you know I'm joining the second hour and bonus episode. Although today we're gonna have an interview with Ro Khanna. He's trying to stop the war. Let's see where his war powers resolution is. He's trying to save $12 trillion. We're going to see where that is in about an hour as well. Guess who else has joined us? Melissa Stoner, awesome name. As if that wasn't enough, her nickname is Melly Puff Dragon. Super fun. She hit the super fun join button. That makes sense. It's right below the video. Lady AF gifted 5 Young Turks memberships, and that makes a ton of sense too. You know what else makes sense? Zohran Mamdani winning in New York. What the bejesus? Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it.
Thank you, my friends.
33-year-old Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, a social media savvy, self-described democratic socialist, has ridden a wave of anti-establishment sentiment to a shocking victory.
I will be your Democratic nominee for the mayor of New York City.
Last night, Cuomo said he called Mamdani to congratulate him.
Tonight is his night. He deserved it. He won.
Well, you heard that correctly. Zohran Mamdani has shocked the Democratic establishment to its core by beating Andrew Cuomo in the New York City mayoral race. Now, despite being smeared as anti-Semitic, a communist by Republicans and Democrats alike, by the way, Mamdani managed to break through all of that noise to unite a pretty broad coalition of New Yorkers. And we'll get into what that coalition looks like in just a minute. But he also was able to break through look, we'll get into a bit of Zohran Mamdani's, and his name is really difficult to say. I'm not mispronouncing it on purpose. Zohran Mamdani. We'll get into his win and how it's caused like this all-out panic in New York and in the Democratic establishment in just a minute. But first, Cenk, real quick, real concise, just one sentence, initial thoughts.
Down goes Cuomo. Down goes Cuomo. Down goes Cuomo. Our members asked for it, including Bloated Ego on TYT.com. I'm here to deliver, and it is a beautiful moment. The Democratic establishment has suffered a heavy blow, and more blows coming. So it's a great, great moment. We'll dissect what's next in this race.
So since New York City has ranked choice voting, elections work a little differently from what most Americans are used to. So bear with me as I kind of explain the process. Mamdani's support after the first round of vote continuing will remain below 50%. And that means that the race will formally be decided by ranked choice votes that will be announced beginning on July 1st. Now, with 93% reporting in the first round, as you can see from this graphic, Mamdani was leading with 43.5% of the vote. And since he cross-endorsed with Brad Lander, who's a progressive who came third with 11.4% of the vote, he's predicted to benefit more than Cuomo from the next round of counting. So you guys understand how that works, right? So yeah. Andrew Cuomo, who received 36.4%, has already conceded, although his campaign left the door open for a November run on a different party line, which has happened before. I believe that happened in an election, a local election in Buffalo, New York, which was pretty gross and it totally worked. So I would not be surprised if Cuomo tried this. But Mamdani ran on an economically progressive platform. He did not hide the fact that he identifies as a democratic socialist, and he has promoted policies including a rent freeze on all stabilized tenants, tripling the city's production of affordable union-built rent-stabilized homes, making city buses free, raising taxes on the top 1% of earners and corporations, and creating a network of city-owned grocery stores. So he wants grocery stores to be publicly owned instead of privately owned. Now, here's an outspoken critic. He is an outspoken critic of Israel's genocide in Gaza. He's also very critical of Cuomo, but look, Cuomo's supporters repeatedly accused him of being anti-Semitic, specifically because he's been rightly critical of Israel's conduct. And you might have seen, like, there was this viral video featuring a woman confronting him for being anti-Semitic. And I gotta say, the way he handled that was so good. Like, he didn't lose his patience, he was calm, he explained himself. And look, he's unfortunately being accused of the same thing that we get accused of when we tell the truth and show you evidence of what's happening in Gaza. Now, his supporters, Cuomo supporters, I should say, included Bill Clinton, Mike Bloomberg, Jim Clyburn, and Richie Torres, which tells you everything you need to know about the type of people who wanted Cuomo to win over Mamdani. And amazingly, Politico found that more than 40% of Cuomo's top endorsements by elected officials have come from people who publicly condemned him 4 years ago. It's amazing. Now, just real quick, if you don't remember, Cuomo not only has been credibly accused of gross sexual misconduct by people who worked for him in the past, but he also made the horrible decision to send elderly people who still had COVID back to nursing homes where the virus continued to spread, and a lot of elderly people died as a result. I think that story is something that people should not forget about because he messed with people's lives, and that wasn't okay. I know that these salacious stories tend to get more attention. And by the way, sexual misconduct should absolutely get the attention, but that doesn't mean you should forget about the other horrible things that Cuomo did as a leader, as the former mayor of New York City. Now, yeah, so Cenk, I know you're chomping at the bit, but I'm gonna make you wait for just one more second. Who voted for Mamdani? If you look at the borough level votes, he beat Cuomo in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens, while Cuomo came out ahead in the Bronx and Staten Island, which that doesn't really surprise me. Staten Island tends to be a little more conservative. But in the Bronx, which of course is represented by AOC, I think, and this is just my guess, there has been more of a concern about disorder and crime and stuff like that in that area. So maybe some of Mamdani's policies as it pertains to policing turned them off. That's just my guess. But his coalition, again, largely consisted of a broad range of people, including white, Asian, and Latino voters in economically and racially diverse areas of the city. Notably, he struggled more in middle class, predominantly Black areas in the Bronx and Southeast Queens, where Cuomo retained strong support from his years as governor. Cuomo also, that's right, he was governor. My bad, I made a mistake earlier. So he was governor. Cuomo also won islands of support on affluent Democratic strongholds like the Upper West and East sides of Manhattan, and in Orthodox Jewish enclaves in Brooklyn, where Mamdani's views on Israel alienated some voters. And in a conversation on the Breaking Points / Drop Site live stream last night, Mamdani, communications director, talked about their strategy, how they managed to win, and how they even reached out to, they reached out to Trump voters? Interesting. Let's see how that turned out.
After Donald Trump was elected and everybody was in a state of shell shock, what was this about? What happened? What did we do? We said, let's just go ask people. Like, let's go to the hearts of immigrant New York. Let's go to South Richmond Hill. Let's go to Fordham Road. Let's go to working class immigrant and Black and brown neighborhoods that swung big for Trump and just ask people, why'd you do it? And we really made a sign that said, let's talk politics. This was 5 days after the presidential election. Stood on the corner and said, let's talk. And we heard again and again and again, I used to have more money in my pocket. Things used to be more affordable. The government is not delivering for me, but there are endless wars around the world, And obviously Trump cynically and disingenuously spoke to those things. He also said cheaper prices end the wars, right? And those are the things that we heard all over the city, especially in those neighborhoods. And when Zohran then said, I'm running for mayor to freeze your rent, make buses fast and free, deliver universal child care, they said, I'll come back and I'll vote for you. And we are actually seeing that tonight.
So reaching out to people who voted for Trump seems to have worked in this situation. I could be wrong, but that was my read of it. What do you think, Cenk?
Yeah, look, that's of course is true, but that's what people have to understand. Reaching out to listen to them doesn't mean that you have to agree with them on their right-wing policies. Zohran didn't agree with them on any of their right-wing policies, and so. But that doesn't mean that you have to curse at them. That doesn't mean you don't have to talk to them. It means you listen and then you go, okay, let me pitch my ideas to you. based on what I heard from you. And let's see if there's an intersection here. And of course there is. Everybody wants lower prices on housing and many other things that he pushed. So we're gonna do a lot of fun things here. I'm gonna talk about his strategy and his substance. One of the fun things I'll tell you about is, did I know this was coming? Okay, I love predictions. I'll tell you about that in a second. But first, I want to explain that was a communications director that you just watched for the campaign, Andrew Bart Epstein. And so I think they did a wonderful, amazing job with communications, not just in reaching out to Trump voters and seeing what they want. That was a part of it and a good part of it, an important part of it. But much more important was, oh my God, his social media, online media engagement was through the roof. And he was so good at it. He was so good at the debates. So look, I'll tell you what I'm most excited about, which is like two things that I get out of this. Number one, the more the establishment is defeated, the happier I am. So in this case, we're defeating the establishment from the left. That's beautiful. And of all the people to defeat in the establishment, Andrew Cuomo, perfect, right? So, and for me, the thing about Andrew Cuomo that always drove me crazy and is related to this race. He always looks out for his donors. He's always trying to protect the status quo. And some of his top donors were real estate donors. They have been historically, and they were in this race. One group alone gave him $2.5 million. So the real estate industry gave him an enormous amount of money just for this, small and quick mayoral race, right? And then Bloomberg gave him $8.3 million. And I love to see that being wasted. That is so beautiful to see, right? So all of this, keep the status quo, didn't work. We're in a new era. We're just saying, oh, it's okay, I'm the Democratic establishment. I know what I'm doing, and just vote for me. I'm the only one who can win. Not working at all anymore. And I'm super psyched about it, right? So why do I think so, Ron? One, is it because of the district? No, Anna, a big part of AOC's district is also in Queens. I think that a couple of things have changed demographically and culturally in New York and across the country that are, I think, a little important, but then I'm gonna get to the big point. So when I remember when, I was involved in the Just Democrat race when AOC won that historic primary also in New York, right? Against Joe Crowley. And in that case, we were rooting for a low voter turnout. We were trying to ambush them, basically. Joe Crowley did not have as much name recognition in that district as they thought he did, and we thought low voter turnout with young, energetic progressives in the district might make the difference, and it did, and that was definitely the right strategy. By the way, run by Showkat Chakrabarti, who's currently running against Nancy Pelosi in a primary. If he takes her out, oh, good night, Irene. The establishment is wiped out. So go check out Showkat's campaign and make sure you're helping there. He could be the next Zohran Mamdani. Okay, so now though, those young progressives are a massive force in New York. We didn't need low voter turnout. This was a higher voter turnout election than historically than in the last couple of decades. And it helped Mamdani, did not hurt Mamdani. That means momentum is on our side, okay? So now when you get to the substance of it, okay, now here's where it gets a little interesting, because when I look at the particular policies that he pushed, I'm so curious about them because they're not the ones I would have picked. I'll be honest with you guys, right? And so, but I'm number one, their change as opposed to the status quo. So great, let's try them. Let's try them and see what happens, right? And I'm genuinely curious to see, can he really raise corporate taxes by that much in New York? Will some of them leave or will all of them stay and then thereby disprove the mythology that they're all going to leave? So I'm very excited about that one. I like that one and I'm curious to see what rate of increase is going to be sustainable, right? That's gonna work, keep the companies there and produce the revenue that we need. He would not back off of the BDS movement against Israel. His strength there was through the roof. I loved it. Okay, so that's my favorite policy that he's got. But I know it doesn't relate much to New York. But so rent control, I've historically think it as problems in the market, but we've got to try to lower the housing prices somehow. Nationally, I think it's by banning private equity from buying residential real estate. That's in our populist plan. In a city, I get why they want to do a rent control freeze. I'm a little worried about how the market dynamics there, but I think it's worth trying and see how it goes. Same thing for school buses, same for free childcare. Can they really do it? Does that make a big difference? And then finally, on defund the police, there's a program to move some of the funding to community service programs. Again, I'm very curious, is that going to work? Could it lower crime? Does it increase crime? Obviously, we will give you an honest assessment of that at some point. And we're not going to play around with the numbers and tell you it worked if it didn't work, or tell you that it didn't work if it did work, right? So we're going to be fair and honest about that. And I want to see him try these things, because change is so much better than not changing. And he's trying to address these folks. And that gets to my most important point, which is, guys, we've been asking for change the whole time. And would I have picked a different policy than government-run grocery stores? Definitely, but maybe I wouldn't have won, right? So he picked these policies, they voted for him. So let's give him a shot to run these policies and see if they're brilliant, see if they totally work. And did I see this coming in? No, I didn't. Because I was used to the AOC era, where you had to have low voter turnout, and if you had, the establishment show up in a race this big, that they were gonna, especially with the ads and stuff, I have seen them overwhelm us time and time again. And Zohran was, not running on like mild policies. He was running on pretty aggressively socialist policies. But I think that his strength, whether the New Yorkers agree with those policies, et cetera, we're gonna find out as we go along. But the fact that he was so strong about it, and said, yeah, that's right. I'm not backing off my position on Israel, and I'm not backing off any of these policies. That was wonderful to see, and the right strategy.
Okay, I need to jump in, especially when you say you didn't expect this to be the outcome of the race. Well, it turns out that Andrew Cuomo's top donor also didn't expect this to be the outcome. And this is amazing. So just bear with me as I read this. This was reported by the New York Times. As donors try to assess their next moves in the mayoral race, one of the biggest donors to Andrew Cuomo's super PAC, the investor Mark Gorton, said he is likely to back Mamdani. That is because of the support that Mamdani had gotten from Brad Lander, who Gorton said he ranked first. I feel like people misunderstood my $250,000 for Cuomo for real enthusiasm, he said in an interview. It was basically, oh, looks like Cuomo is coming back. We don't want to be shut out. Let's try to get on his good side. That's kind of how things work with Cuomo. It's sad political pragmatism. I wish we lived in a world where those sort of things were not useful things to do.
Yeah, that's so telling.
It's amazing.
First of all, I look forward to giving somebody $250,000 just because I'm not enthusiastic about them. Like, wow, what a stunning amount of money to give when you're not enthusiastic. Okay, so I hope he's enthusiastic about Mamdani, because that might be a decent number. But look at the kind of corruption that Andrew Cuomo ran. And this is very true of Cuomo and the Clintons. They would make a list, and if you didn't bribe them, you were gonna be in a lot of trouble. And if you did bribe them, then you were on the good guy list, and you were gonna get a goodie, not from Cuomo, but from the taxpayers.
Isn't that extortion?
Of course it is. I mean, but it's bribery, it's extortion, it's all these things.
So gross.
But the Supreme Court made it all legal. So they're like, oh, it is a campaign contribution. I am speaking to you. So look, it's interesting how quickly Cuomo's donors have given up, how quickly Cuomo gave up, because technically Mamdani hasn't won yet. It's 40, he's at 43.6, he's got to get to 50 so that this is the only round of voting, right? And we think he's gonna get to 50 because of the Lander votes and maybe others, but man, Cuomo was like, forget it, I give up right away, okay, which is great to see. But don't get too excited about that. Anna's definitely right about that race in upstate New York and how the establishment always comes back. And not only in this case do you have the pro status quo, pro corporate, pro real estate, pro donor community that is gonna come in like a bulldozer into the general election race. But you also have the Israel First community that's going to come in, okay? And I'm super proud of the Jewish community in New York that was not shaken by the false accusations of anti-Semitism. There's 1 million Jewish Americans in New York, okay? And a Muslim American just won the Democratic primary in that city. So love you guys. Way to stay strong, way to all be Americans and not buy into the gaslighting and the propaganda. But they're gonna be back in the general election, and it is going to be on steroids when the neocons, et cetera, hit Mamdani.
A final thing that I'll say about Mamdani's win and the fact that he appears poised to win in the end of this election cycle, he front-loaded the economic policies. Okay, he sure would comment on some of the social issues in the country. Obviously, he commented on foreign policy as well as it pertains to what's happening in the Middle East. However, he front-loaded economic policies. And that's what matters to most Americans, especially in a city like New York, where the cost of living is astronomical. And reaching out to people who voted differently, who didn't vote for Democrats, who voted for Trump in the last election cycle is so important. Because even if you can't persuade them, you at least get an understanding of where that base is at, what it is about Trump that persuaded them to vote for a man like that. And again, for everyone who denies that, Trump's faux economic populism is what persuaded people to support him, I think it's pretty clear that in reaching out to these Trump voters and talking about the economic policies that Mamdani wants to champion, who's able to bring some people over onto his side. And so that's how you win. It reminds me of what Trump did in the last presidential election when he spoke before a conference of libertarians who booed him. They totally booed him. Everyone on the left was clowning on him. But I saw it differently because to me, that was Trump going into hostile territory, reaching out to voters and trying to make his case. That's how you win. So anyway, we've got more to get to in this story. So let's take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about all the various people who are panicking about Mamdani.
All right, let's go to Super Chat. Let's go to some of your comments. Schrodinger's Dragon writes in, Cenk, you and the other hosts keep me sane, especially with my Trump-loving family, who I have stopped arguing with because there's no point. And Bart helps a lot. Well, that's beautiful to hear. Nice job, Bart. Titan writes in, Iran may be safeguarded uranium. It's possible they have only been set back months, but they are still years away from a weapon because they were never developing a weapon regardless if to set them back months or years. That's a great point, Titan, and not one that has been made on television as far as I know. Stinky Stocking Full of Lies writes in, Anna, I saw you versus the genocide apologist guy on Piers Morgan. Good job sticking it to those clowns. More Palestinian perspective is needed online and TV.
Thank you.
Yep. Ronald Fan writes in, happy hump day, TYT family, especially to you and Anna, Cenk. Thank you for reminding me to sign the petition of no more war on Iran. I hope this resource to stop this war. You both are so nice to me. Well, Ronald, you're nice to us too. Listen, unitedagainstwar.com is that petition that he's talking about. Everybody go sign it, unitedagainstwar.com. I'm gonna talk to Ro Khanna about it in just a little bit. We appreciate you, Ronald. And that was in YouTube member section. Now let's go to TYT.com member section. Benjamin writes, can this dude stop being so enthusiastic about me and the TYT fam and chuck us some cash? Referring to Cuomo's donor who gave $250,000 while not being enthusiastic about Cuomo. Dave 1990 wrote in, the fact that he's willing to try new things in New York City is appealing. He really put in the work to run and deserve the win. Totally agree. Pessimistic Progressive says, I think you mean the status quo. That's a good one. That's a good one. That's the kind of dad joke I like, okay? I'm gonna use that one probably at some point in the show. All right. No money, no justice writes in. Very happy that Mamdani won the primary. Just hope that Adams and maybe Cuomo don't split the vote so much by running independent that we wind up with Curtis Sliwa for mayor. That would be a hilarious tragedy. Yeah, I can't imagine Sliwa as the mayor. I hope not. Churchill Delanosa says, Zoran, a flickering light in dark political times. Yep. But go back to that splitting the vote thing. Look, I wouldn't be surprised if Cuomo or whoever or Adams was somehow splitting the vote with Mamdani, and then the media tried this hilarious nonsense at some point where they say, since it's splitting the vote, Mamdani should consider getting out of the race. Okay, now that's my first prediction about the race. Let's see if that happens. But like the media hates Mamdani, the mainstream media. So it's going to be super interesting to see what they do with that, but they're gonna wanna make sure that he doesn't win the race. Anyway, Corey Schiffauer says, Anna, I watched you a little bit against the Israeli terrorists on Piers. Get him, girl. That was incredible. Also, I'll never vote Republican, but I am listening to Tucker Carlson podcast now. I wanna hear other perspectives, and that's all because of you. Look, hearing other perspectives is good. Don't get too sucked into Tucker. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna, but also Snow Goddess and iGen966 who joined up on TYT.com. We love that. Thanks for doing that. Appreciate that. You get a couple of months off if you do an annual subscription there too. But we also have Morningstar, the Gray Jedi that just joined through YouTube. Hit that beautiful join button below. Happy to have all of you guys here. Anna's got the next story.
Well, I wanted to continue in our discussion about Mamdani and how he's poised to win as the new mayor of New York City. And well, there are people freaking out about it. So that's what we want to focus on here. Unsurprisingly, now that it appears that Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani is poised to win as the new mayor of New York City, his economic wish list has struck terror in the hearts of Wall Street executives, as demonstrated perfectly on CNBC. Take a look.
The rent's too high. You know what? The new mayor potentially of New York is going to freeze the rents and everybody eats for free. So they don't have to worry.
Really?
Yeah.
But how about the rich?
No.
Do
well,
they
no.
get shot?
No. Yes, they get taken away.
Are we kulaks?
Yes, they get
Is this
taken
Lenin
away. We have to go.
in 23?
We have to leave now.
Not
But
John
everybody
Lennon.
else, there he is, Mamdani. He wants to get the rents down. One good way to do it is to stop all business and drive everybody out. That'll bring the rents down.
Gotham. Have you seen what Batman is up against in Gotham and what the guy running for mayor is up against? That's what it reminds me of. They're taking Wall Streeters and make him walk out onto the ice in the East River as and hope and then they fall through.
Yep,
I mean, there is a class warfare that's going.
So what's happened here, I think, is
the rich.
Part of the reason why President Roosevelt pursued the New Deal is because he wanted to protect capitalism. I'm not kidding. That was literally a quote of his. He saw that the inequality was leading to a rise in socialism in the country. And he was worried that it was going to impact our capitalistic economy. So he's like, the rich have gotten a little too greedy. We need to do something about this. And the same is happening now. But these greedy folks over at CNBC don't want to do a damn thing to fix it. They like the system the way it is. But if you want to see why, or you want to understand why someone who has identified himself as a socialist openly, overtly, is somehow appealing to the public, it's because all of that inequality has been destroying their lives for decades now. And the other part of it is, Cenk, I gotta admit, even I watched that compilation of CNBC hosts. Like injected in my veins. Like watching that panic is kind of cathartic because they got way too greedy. They got way too confident and cocky. And if you want to save capitalism, the American people have to feel that capitalism is working for them. And right now, they're not feeling that way. Inequality has been exploding year after year. People can't afford their freaking rent. So when you have a candidate who says, I'm a socialist and I want to make housing affordable, and the other guy, a corporate Democrat, Andrew Cuomo, has really no solution at all, yeah, it's not surprising that they would support Mamdani over Cuomo. And by the way, Cuomo is now threatening to run in the next round of this ranked choice voting process as an independent, hoping that he can win. We'll see if that works. But what do you think, Cenk?
Yeah, so that would be in the general election, of course. So first of all, I love the smell of establishment panic in the morning. And so that they're 100% panic. Secondly, look, the super important genie has been let out of the bottle here. For my entire life, mainstream media has been trying to make sure that Democrats don't really serve the average voter. And they always do propaganda like, socialism is going to work here. Okay, what are they like, Mao and like Cuba and Fidel Castro and Mao? Like this is the kind of horse crap propaganda I've heard my whole life. And by the way, not just on Fox News, but all over cable news, right? Anytime you try to help the average American in any way, shape, or form, they smear the living crap out of you, right? So in this case, he's like, look. For example, I don't love rent control. I don't think it's necessarily the right way to keep housing prices down. But should we try something to keep housing prices down? Of course, of course. So Cuomo's answer was, I'm gonna take money from real estate interests and serve them. And that's a terrible answer, terrible, right? And media's like, oh, what a brilliant idea. Take money from real estate interests and let them rob everyone in New York as much as they like. No, not a good idea, awful idea. So Zohran's idea is, hey, I'm going to try to control the pricing somehow, right? And I'm going to try this and let's see if it works. But mainly, I'm addressing your number one concern. See, politics isn't that complicated. You just have to get around mainstream media. And he did through social media and through so many other ways. He got his message to the people. I'm actually going to try to do something about your housing prices. And that's the thing you care most about.
When Catherine Wild, the CEO of Partnership for New York City, was asked about the business community and how they feel about Mamdani, she simply replied, terrified. Bradley Tusk, CEO of Tusk Ventures, warned that while unlikely, New York could go the way of once very prosperous cities like Detroit and Baltimore that had really big tax bases and then got dirty and dangerous, and the taxes went up too much, and people left.
That's not what happened at all.
Okay,
sorry, just jumping in real quick. Things like the car industry got hurt in Detroit. That's what happened in Detroit. These guys love to lie, man. So is Wall Street going to move out of New York because of Mamdani? I would be dramatically surprised. So let's see what happens. But this is a lot of fear mongering. Like don't vote against the rich. Whatever you do, don't vote against the rich.
And Democratic leadership seems super thrilled about this. Obviously, I'm kidding, because if you take a look at how Hakeem Jeffries, who is the House Minority Leader, responded to a question about Mamdani on Morning Joe this morning, you'll kind of get a sense that leadership not so happy. Take a look.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on him ideologically. Is that does he have an ideology that you would want your candidates in 2026 to have?
Well, from the standpoint of House Democrats and what our focus has been, clearly we have an affordability crisis in the United States of America, and our focus will continue to be on driving down the high cost of living in this country. Donald Trump promised to lower costs on day one. Costs haven't gone down, they're going up. He's crashing the economy in real time. His tariffs are going to impose thousands of dollars in additional cost on everyday Americans per year. And he may even be driving us toward a recession. It's the reason why Donald Trump has become so unpopular.
Okay, so look, I don't know if that was an example of robot Hakeem Jeffries just going back to the Trump bad talking points when he's asked something specific about a local mayoral race. But the fact that he had this inability to say anything about Mamdani specifically, I don't know. It kind of tells me everything I need to know about how shills, corporate goons like Hakeem Jeffries feel about Mamdani and his economic policies. Yeah.
And I think there's two things going on here. Actually, three things happening here. So number one, do you want to run every race in the country with Mamdani's policies that he won in New York City with? No, to be honest, right? Because New York City is deep blue. And so he did a brilliant job of running with the right policies in the right place, right? But if you run with those same exact policies, some of them, by the way, will be very popular in Wichita because everybody cares about housing prices, et cetera. And some of them won't be. And so like if Hakeem Jeffries said, hey, listen, everybody's gonna run their own campaign, but I love the Zohran one, but every candidate is their own person, no problem, right? But he did the corporate robot thing and then he switched to the Donald Trump talking points. You're absolutely right about that. But there's two other reasons why Hakeem Jeffries is concerned that are not legitimate. So one is, this guy is super progressive and in New York. Hakeem Jeffries is from New York and Chuck Schumer is from New York. And they're both worried to death about a progressive primary challenger. So they're like, Mamdani, let me tell you about Donald Trump. Let me tell you about Donald Trump. Yeah, that's what I thought. They're in a cold sweat panic. In fact, if AOC announces a Senate race against Chuck Schumer, boom, it's over. After these results, Chuck Schumer will just retire. There's no way he's gonna get embarrassed by AOC. And everybody knows AOC is gonna win. So that's her Senate seat to pick up if she wants it, right? Schumer will run for the hills. And then there's a third factor. And the third factor is, remember, all these guys are loaded up with AIPAC money. So when they see Mamdani, they've already gotten marching orders. No, that you are all Democratic leadership must be opposed to Mamdani. And they tried to stay out of that race, but we all know they were backing Cuomo, especially Schumer. So now that their guy lost, yeah, they're pretty somber about it.
Yeah. A bunch of right wingers are super Islamophobic and hateful toward him because he's the first Muslim. If he wins, he'd be the first Muslim mayor of New York City. We don't have time to get to all of them, but I'll read what Laura Loomer posted because she's a bigoted piece of trash. She says, if the Muslim Brotherhood would have been designated as a terrorist organization, Zohran Mamdani could have been prevented from running for office. Get right. Listen, honestly, Laura Loomer is like bottom of the barrel, okay? Perfectly happy to risk the lives of our soldiers in wars on behalf of Israel. And she has the audacity to impugn the character of a guy simply because he's Muslim. Simply because he's Muslim. And by the way, you don't like his policies, that's fine. Go ahead and talk about his policies, talk about why you don't like those policies, you don't think they're gonna work. But attacking someone simply because they're Muslim is gross. Just like, maybe I'll put it in the context that Laura Loomer can understand. Just like how it's disgusting when someone is attacked for being Jewish. That's unacceptable, right? So why is it acceptable for her to specifically attack him over his identity? And I've seen it all over the place. Marjorie Taylor Greene, this is disgusting. She shared an image of the Statue of Liberty, obviously wearing, what is that, a niqab?
Burqa.
Or a burqa, yeah. Gross, it's just gross all the way around. Accusations that now Sharia law is coming to New York City. It's pretty gross how bigoted and openly Islamophobic pretty prominent members of the right happen to be. Again, you don't like his policies, attack his policies. But when you attack his identity, makes you look dumb and hateful, and that's it.
Yeah. So Charlie Kirk wrote, 24 years ago, a group of Muslims killed 2,753 people on 9/11. now a Muslim socialist is on pace to run New York City. And a Muslim plumber will show up and help you with your sink later today, and a Muslim dentist will remove your cavity. Why are we listing random Muslim folks? So look, you know what's going on here, and this is part of the problem with the radical right. Obviously, it's the main problem with the radical right. They also have their purity tests, but their purity tests are oftentimes based on race, religion, ethnic background, and if you're not one of them, then you're part of the 9/11 bombers. Like, what's amazing to me is like what Anna referred to there. That, like, if you said this about Jewish people, some, like, I don't know, Son of Sam was a serial killer in the city in the 1970s, and he was Jewish, and now a Jewish guy has won the mayorship. You'd be like, what? Okay, like, number one, enormously hateful, but number two, super random. Are you really that dumb that you think that every Jewish person acts the same? And that's basically what I asked Charlie Kirk in on X. I'm like, do you really think that all Muslims are like the 9/11 bombers? Can anyone really be that ignorant? And then as you see the replies from some of the radical right, the answer is, yeah, a lot of people can be that incredibly ignorant. They really have it in their mind, and it got there partly through right-wing media and partly through mainstream media, and that's why I was so enraged about mainstream media just a couple of days ago, right, on this issue. They really like drilled it into people's heads that Muslims are terrorists and savage and violent, and that's all they are. And so now a lot of radical right believes that, and it's totally nuts. So, all right, anyways, when he turns out to be a normal mayor, maybe they'll begin to see, oh, Muslims are humans too. Okay, welcome to planet Earth.
Do we need to take another break? I can't, damn it, god damn it. Okay, let's take another break, we'll be back.
All righty. So guys, I'd love to tell you about how you should join me in watching the Brave New Films movie tomorrow, but sold out. So next time when I tell you to panic, panic, okay? Such a random thing to say. All right, guys, we do have member merch though on shoptyt.com. You can't panic about that. So if you're a member, you get discounts on merch. So make sure you're checking out tyt.com/member merch. That makes sense. tyt.com/member merch. Check out our podcasting network. Make sure you ring the bell on YouTube. And if you're a member, you could watch last night's Old School, where Michael and I had a great time. So Melbat42, thank you for joining on tyt.com. You're awesome. We appreciate you. Over 9,000 wrote in on tyt.com. TYT family, you all matter and help make a difference. Thanks. Right back at you. I don't have a clever handle, wrote in. Buffalonian here, as hopeful as I want to be, I'll wait till the outcome of the general election before I celebrate. Never underestimate establishment trickery. Yeah, I hear you on that, and that is what happened after a progressive won in Buffalo. Denny Sam says they're calling it class warfare, helping regular people. I'm dying, and laughing emoji. Yeah, no. When you try to help regular people, that is always called class warfare by mainstream media. Underwear Chef says the media is just making Mamdani seem awesome. Telling people that you're worried about the well-being of the rich isn't the burn they think it is. Ding, 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 ding. We have a winner. That's awesome and totally true. Wong Jun said, wait, what did I miss? I fell asleep halfway through hearing Hakeem Jeffries talk. That's also true. Chef Topher wrote in, I love how he cries class warfare when they started it by decades of rigging the system in their favor. You guys got it 100% right, exactly right, okay? AJ Nestor on Twitch says, having actually won a primary means that people will listen. I've heard him speak and people are going to be impressed. Yeah, he's terrific on the campaign trail. So he, on Super Chat, Romulus463 writes in, cutting back on outdated and useless government regulations on buildings, new housing, like Minnesota, boom in housing takes place. Red states don't have a problem with new housing. Many states don't have a shortage. So Romulus is kind of going with the abundance theory that Ezra Klein and others have written about. And I'm totally open to that too. I want to try every single thing, see how we could lower housing prices. And I don't want to prejudge the outcome too much. Schrodinger's Dragon says, I was just thinking today about who I like the most in the TYT network, Dr. Richie, John, Cenk, Anna, and I came to the conclusion that everyone is so talented and informed that I can't decide. Keep keeping us sane for decades. You're awesome, we appreciate that. Everybody check out Damage Report and it is. All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Anna, what's next?
I want to talk a little bit about strategy for the Democratic Party. In a recent piece that was penned for the New York Times, the question of whether or not Democrats need their own version of Trump was addressed. This is a piece titled Why Democrats Need Their Own Trump, written by Galen Druk. And Galen makes the case that, maybe having a Democratic version of Trump could make all the difference. The 2028 presidential hopefuls are likely to divide into two camps, moderates and progressives. But these paths misunderstand Democrats' predicament and will fail to win over a meaningful majority in the long term. If the next Democratic nominee wants to build a majority coalition, the candidate should attack the Democratic Party itself and offer positions that outflank it from both the right and the left. It may seem like an audacious gambit, but a successful candidate has provided them a blueprint, Donald Trump. Now, Galen goes on to say that to be clear, the blueprint I refer to is not the one Trump has used to violate democratic norms and destabilize American institutions, but rather the one for resetting how Americans view a party and its leaders. So he talks about how in 2016, Trump ran a campaign on very right-wing immigration policies, obviously, but also leaned left, or at least pretended to lean left on some of these social safety net policies, and repeatedly called out unpopular Republican politicians. Honestly, that was part of the reason why during the Republican primary in 2016, it was actually a lot more entertaining and enjoyable to watch those debates because of the fact that he would call out Republicans for their foibles and their unpopular policies. This allowed him to shore up a key portion of the primary electorate for whom immigration was the most important issue, while appealing to a broader electorate for whom the economy was the most important issue. The message was clear. No matter where you stood on the political spectrum, if you had a grievance with the status quo GOP, Trump was your guy. And so, Cenk, what are your thoughts about this strategy?
I think it's obvious. People are saying, "Oh, that's bold. That's what a crazy strategy." Why is it crazy? Trump just used it to win. And just break it down one more level. He's basically saying Democrats should go with their most popular policies and not their least popular policies. Wow, how revolutionary. Of course. Well, that's what Trump did. Trump was like, "Oh, I'll take the popular policies or, their range of popularity, but the ones that excite my base, but still have enough independents that support it, right? Like on immigration. And then I'll dump all the unpopular policies the Republicans have and blame them for it because they're unpopular because of those policies." To me, that is just elementary politics. So when you apply it to Democrats, the problem with Democrats is that they never criticize each other because they're such a top-down party these days. And they're like, okay, everybody follow leadership, obey, right? Well, yeah, that you can't, I mean, but it's in a primary. If you're running in a Democratic primary for president, you have to criticize the other people in the race and say why you're better than them. Again, elementary politics, but they beat that out of Bernie Sanders. And that's part of why he lost, because he wouldn't do that kind of elementary politics. And then should you say, hey, I don't agree with the unpopular Democratic policies. If you don't agree, of course you should say it, because you should be honest. And it gets you an easy win in terms of the general voters and also the Democratic voters. There's a lot of policies in the Democratic Party that Democratic voters, the majority of Democratic voters, don't want. So if you can't speak out against that, then you're just not courageous enough to win.
Yep. All right, and finally, David Sirota says the candidates should attack the Democratic Party and offer positions that outflank it. And he calls this out, saying it's amazing that a handful of us have been making this case for 20 years. And God, I hate Democratic politics. I just do. I hate it so much. But yes, it's true. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party has been making this argument for a long time. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party is never taken seriously because the corporate wing of the Democratic Party controls everything, including the establishment, the DNC. So look, do I think anyone's actually going to take this advice? Unlikely, but I would love to be proven wrong, because there are some issues that I think Democrats should moderate on, but other issues that they should be further to the left on. That does it for the main show. Thank you for watching. Cenk is going to interview Congressman Ro Khanna in the bonus episode. It's open for everyone, so stick around. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
All right, back on the Young Turks. Joining me now, Congressman Ro Khanna. He's up to a lot of interesting things. He was trying to stop a war with Iran. I'm going to ask for the latest updates on that. And then he put together a realistic budget to cut $12 trillion. Now, I mean, if you're a populist, right, left, or center, you should love that plan. So we'll talk about it, and we'll see if you do love it or not. Ro, first, let's talk about the War Powers Resolution Act. So you had that resolution co-sponsored with Tom Massey. Donald Trump has attacked Tom Massey for that, called him a little boy, pathetic, and all these things. And so you lined up a bunch of Democratic sponsors, but now we're apparently in a ceasefire. So does that mean that we're not going to vote on that? And is there any scenario where we do vote on that resolution?
We still may vote on it. There's still opportunity to co-sponsor it. Look, Donald Trump has two people on his shoulders. One, the neocon saying regime change, you got to bomb Iran, the Lindsey Graham wing. And then he's got the MAGA base that are Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, we don't want any wars in Iran. Thomas Massey is up to we don't want any more wars in the Middle East. And we came together on this War Powers Resolution. I do think everyone speaking out in MAGA, people speaking out in progressive caucus and around the country, the anti-war movements, as well as the War Powers Resolution, convinced Trump to abandon the idea for regime change. He said, okay, I've done the bombing enough. And the hope is that sticks. But look, you already got Lindsey Graham saying it's not enough. You've already got Republicans saying, well, we may not have destroyed enough of the nuclear capability. So he's going to continually have this push to go back in. And that's why we need to make sure that before he does anything further ever on Iran, he comes to Congress.
Do you think that the MAGA rebellion against the war, the split that they had, did that make a little difference or a lot of difference in your opinion?
I think it made a significant difference. I mean, I think that Donald Trump tweeted out that regime change may not be a bad thing. He half joked about it, but he was getting a lot of pressure saying just keep bombing, take him out. I'm sure Netanyahu was pushing him in that direction. And I think he started to hear from people saying, look, you promised us no endless wars. And so he comes in and he says, well, no American lives lost. I just struck them. We're in a day. I'm done. I'm not for endless wars. And like classic Trump, he kind of tries to have his foot in both camps. But the point is, I'm glad there are two camps. I mean, we've gone through presidencies where there are not two camps. And this is when people say, well, did it make a difference? In politics, you never know what makes a difference. But I certainly think that if he's threatening Thomas Massey with long social media posts and $20 million, you got his attention, you got under his skin. And he knows how to read the room. He knows popular sentiment, and that he factored that in.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. So if it comes back and the ceasefire somehow violated, or Trump decides to go back into the war, and then this goes to a vote, it doesn't look like a lot of Republican politicians are going to support it, though, because Massey's got, no co-sponsors on his side. Last I checked, if I'm wrong about
one, Chuck Edwards, but yeah.
Oh, okay, Chuck Edwards. And how many co-sponsors did you get on your side? And do we think that that most of Congress would actually vote for war if it came to a vote?
So we've gotten 73 and counting. I mean, it's been harder than I thought. You would think every Democrat would get on this War Powers Resolution, but it's been a harder push. We have passed a War Powers Resolution, as you know, once before with Bernie Sanders and me to stop the war in Yemen. So it is possible, but it depends on how egregious the action is and how much Republicans find their courage. I will say that the reason Donald Trump targeted Massey is that we were talking to at least 10 different Republicans who were seriously considering getting on if the war had continued. And I think he wanted to have a chilling effect, saying, don't even think about this unless you want my political team coming after you.
Yeah. So, and of course, the politicians inside Congress are very different than Trump and MAGA and progressives. So the voters are very different than the folks in Congress. And I mean, look,
that may be the most profound statement you've made ever. That is the fundamental disconnect. The voters, the base of people are so different than the people who are actually elected. It's sad, but it's true. It's a disconnect. It's what allowed for Donald Trump to become president. It's what allowed Bernie Sanders to become this phenomena because they had the guts actually to go out and say, look, the establishment isn't working.
Yeah. Man, look, I hope it doesn't come back up. I hope the ceasefire holds, that we never bomb Iran again, they never hit us again, none of that happens, and etc. But I would be curious if it did come back and you guys had that vote, because AIPAC's in the building, and so let me just ask you last question on that. How much of an effect do you think AIPAC would have on a vote like that?
It'll have an impact, obviously, but people ascribe all the blame to AIPAC, but it's a whole coalition. You've got the national security hawks, you've got the defense hawks, you've got, of course, AIPAC on that, and they all are this foreign policy blob where you get painted as a weak on national security, weak on American security, and that has an impact.
Yeah, defense contractors that would make billions from the wars, etc. So, okay, let's talk about saving money instead of spending money. So, Donald Trump and Elon Musk talked a big game, Doge, and we're going to cut $2 trillion from the budget and all this stuff. And then we didn't get very many cuts. A lot of the cuts on Doge were disputed to begin with. But even if they were all true, it's kind of a drop in the bucket after they're going to add 3 to 5 trillion with this tax cut into the budget. So, and they added to the Pentagon. So they got no savings at all. They're going in the opposite direction. Trump was obviously empirically full of crap on cutting from the budget. He's adding to the deficit and the debt, right? So, but how in the world are you proposing to save $12 trillion if you do it with left-wing populism?
Well, let's look at the basic math. So we're $36 trillion in debt. Over the next 10 years, we've got basically $2 trillion deficits. If you just keep the status quo, that's about $20 trillion over 10 years. The Republican budget would add to that. So their budgets would have $24 trillion added. And what ours would do is save $12 trillion. So you're still running a small deficit, but instead of having 20 trillion more of deficits over 10 years, now you're having about $7 to $8 trillion of deficit. So how do we save the 12 trillion? It's pretty simple. You tax the billionaires and multimillionaires more. You have a tax on stock buybacks and make sure that people, when they're getting an inheritance, are actually paying the capital gains tax. But you also cut spending. You cut the defense contractors. You don't have a Pentagon budget over $1 trillion. You cut the fraud from Medicare Advantage, which everyone acknowledges that they're upbilling and ripping off the American taxpayers by making it seem that people are sicker than they are. You cut the fossil fuel subsidies. You cut funding when it comes to waste in procurement because we don't have a competitive process. And with that, and then you negotiate for prescription drugs to bring the cost of prescription drugs down. With that, you can save about $12 trillion. Now, we put it out there. I guarantee you there's going to be something you don't like in the budget, either some tax you disagree with or some spending cut you disagree with. But it's an honest budget. And I think at this point, why don't we actually have every member of Congress offer an honest budget of where they're going to get savings instead of putting having a magical view that we're going to have 3 or 4% growth and basically lying to the American people.
Yeah, so let me probe into a couple of those. So on the corporate tax increases, they're pretty modest, actually. You'd be bringing them to 28%, which is still lower than where they were pre-Trump, in 2015. So, okay, so that's certainly not radical. It's very normal. How about the tax on the wealthy? What do you mean by that? How would that go up?
Well, if you're over $100 million, you would get 1 to 2% of your assets taxed every year, and you're making at least 7-8% on returns. Just if you put the money in a mutual fund, probably much more, but you pay 1 to 2% on that. And the reality is, most of those folks are not paying tax. They're just letting their money continue to appreciate.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not paying tax until realization.
Yeah. So it's a tough issue because they avoid a lot of the taxes by just taking out loans,
right,
based on the amount of shares they have in different stock, And it'll be interesting to see how you could put an end to that. But it applies to only people making above or that have above $100 million in wealth.
And it's not taxing unappreciated capital gains. So one, you can tax the loans as a realization of event. But let's say you're worth $1 billion. Now you go up to $2 billion. If you were to tax unrealized capital gains at 20-some%, the unrealized gains would be $1 billion. That person would be paying $200 million in tax. But if you're just saying we're going to pay 1% of $2 billion, you're paying $20 million in tax. So this is not saying that unrealized gains are being taxed. This is just like a property tax. Your estate includes not just your property, but your net assets. And I think it's a much easier sell than taxing the unrealized capital gains.
That's really interesting. Okay, so now we go to the ones that I think are kind of relatively easy. And what I really want to ask is, since they have overwhelming popularity, I mean, all these three that I'm going to list are probably above 80%. So the real way that they get stopped is through your colleagues. So let's start with one of them, ending the fossil fuel subsidies. So your estimation is that it's about $17 billion a year, right? So over a decade, we save $170 billion. So, okay, if you put that up for a vote and all of the American people were paying attention, it might be unanimous. Why would we give the richest companies in the world extra money from the average American who could barely afford it? Especially that they're not a nascent industry, they're a very mature industry, et cetera. So why doesn't it ever go up for a vote? And why can't we end these preposterous subsidies that no one other than oil executives want?
Well, because it's the oil lobby, the big oil and gas companies have huge lobbies. They give a lot of money to members of Congress. They have PACs, and they paint you as, oh, if you're opposed to fossil fuel subsidies, are you opposed to natural gas? Are you opposed to oil? No, we're not opposed to it. It's just you've had these subsidies since 1916. Maybe it's time that we move on. I mean, imagine if we still had to have solar subsidies in the year 2100. The absurdity of it is we have a tilted playing field in this country. The tilting playing field isn't in the advantage of let's get the new industry, solar, wind, and geothermal. The tilted playing field is in the advantage of oil and traditional fossil fuels. And all I'm saying is don't give them an advantage. No one is saying, okay, don't let them do business until there's a transition away. It's just don't give them a taxpayer advantage.
Yeah, look, I'm livid over the $4 billion we send to Israel every year, but 17 billion is more than 4x that, and it's every single year for almost, now I mean, like it wasn't 17 billion back in the day, but these subsidies have been going on, as you point out, for over 100 years. So it's just criminal. But Ro, to ask you a tough question here, when the Democrats are in charge, we don't vote on these either. So isn't it true that some of your Democratic colleagues also take fossil fuel money, and that's why we never get a vote on this?
Well, I pushed very hard as the chair of the Environment Committee to get a vote on this. I pushed to get it in the Inflation Reduction Act. I pushed to get it in the American Rescue Plan. I kept getting shut down. And the reason is some of it is oil and gas money. Some of it is a perception that Democrats don't want to get painted as anti-oil and gas. But I don't think even someone working in the oil and gas industry will object if you say, I don't want to subsidize your industries, which is going not to you, it's going to the executives. I mean, if there was some subsidy for tech companies, even though I represent Silicon Valley, I'd say that's crazy. You don't need to subsidize the corporations and the executives. So I just think we have to have more a principle in being willing to stand up for what's right.
So I want to understand how these lobbies actually get things done. Because another one of your proposals is Medicare Advantage. For those who don't know, it's set up in the wrong way, so it's incentivized this giant scam. And some of you might be familiar with it because you get a call saying, "Oh, we're your insurance company and we'd like to send a nurse over," right? And so, oh, what a wonderful thing, right? No, the nurse is going to pretend that you have a lot of ailments that you don't have, and charge the American government and totally and utterly rob us. And they've robbed us of at least what, 100 billion a year? I don't know, it's just a monster number. You would know better than I would. But so the only people who are in favor of that is the health insurance companies, because it's nothing but a robbery, right? So again, if you go to propose this and to vote on it, there is no excuse for it. So do Democrats and Republicans just say, like, what do they say internally? Do they say like, yeah, well, obviously I'm a crook and I'm taking money from these guys? Or what's their excuse here?
Well, the dirty secret in Washington is it's not how people vote, it's what comes up for a vote. So the way the lobbyists work is they don't allow it to come for a vote. They'll make sure that it's not part of these big bills. They'll make sure that it doesn't advance through committee. And you can't blame someone. It just becomes amorphous. Well, the leadership didn't want it. Well, who's the leadership? Well, is it a committee chair? Is it the speaker? Is it the House Majority Leader? Or is it some caucus? It just wasn't included. We didn't have the votes, so we aren't going to include it. So this way, no single individual has to take blame. No one ends up going on the record, and no change is made. And 90% of things where American people are like, why can't we get that done? The reason we can't get it done is because it doesn't come up for a vote. It's not even that people are voting against it. It's just that they don't want it to come up for a vote.
So, Ro, I have a theory, and I want to bounce it off of you here, because I think that a lot of this stuff gets solved if you just find a way, and this is not an easy thing to do, but if you find a way to put a national spotlight on it. And so, look, if we had a progressive president, then it gets infinitely easier because they could just use the bully pulpit and go one by one on these issues. But like, whenever Trump wants to put a spotlight on something, he puts a massive, massive spotlight on it. If you put a spotlight on any one of these subsidies and scams and actual waste, fraud, and abuse, the American people would hate it. And then so is it possible that that kind of public pressure and just being able to highlight it so that there's a national conversation around it could actually make a difference in getting it passed?
I think it's incredibly important. It's 60% of the game. It's something we didn't do enough of in the last presidency with Biden. But I think it's 60% because Trump lacks something that is also needed, which is follow through. So Trump did put a huge bully pulpit on big pharma ripping off Americans, and they're charging Americans more than any other country. He said, no, that's got to stop. You can't charge Americans more for your drugs than you are in other industrialized countries. I get if you want to charge people in Africa less, but not people in Japan less. I introduced that executive order as legislation in Congress, and we had a couple of Republicans co-sponsor it, and since then it's just languished. Now, what it would require is not just a president signing that executive order, it would require Trump on Truth Social every other day saying, I want that legislation to pass. I want the spotlight not just to be there, but I want to translate that spotlight into legislation. And that's where you have these great presidents like Lyndon Johnson, who don't just highlight it, but then work every legislator to actually get their things done. Biden had some of the skill of getting legislation through. He didn't have the spotlight. Trump has some of the skill of spotlight, but he doesn't care a lot about the details of the legislation. And so that languishes as well.
Well, and of course, there's one other thing with Trump, which is that he doesn't actually want to do it. He wants to get the credit for the marketing, like, I'm going to, right? And you're like, okay, well, Ro turned it into a bill with a couple of Republicans. Why don't you back that? No, he's busy backing the giant tax cut for the rich. So that's where his priorities are. But actually tonight, coincidentally, we didn't know you were going to be on tonight, but we have an Operation Hope meeting right after this interview, and people can sign up at tyt.com/hope. And our volunteers decided that they're going to try to back your House Resolution 3493 to lower drug prices.
Oh, fantastic. I appreciate that. That'll be a big help. Half the challenge in these things is just getting Democrats on board with it and Republicans. But it's so frustrating to me how some of these issues we don't even have consensus within the Democratic Party. Like our party should be against fossil fuel spending. Our party should be against big pharma ripping off Americans. Our party should be against huge defense contractors making record profits. Our party should be willing to tax the ultra rich more. And yet on all these things that I mentioned, you probably would be hard pressed to get a majority of the Democratic caucus still on board.
Yeah, so first of all, I didn't realize they called it Khanna. I love that Operation Hope did that. But look, so Ro is right. First of all, when it comes to the Democrats, do you want lower drug? I mean, literally every Democrat has said they want lower drug prices. So this puts them to the test. There's no reason to say no to this. None, right? This is Democratic Agenda 101. And to Ro's point about the Republicans, well, it was a Trump executive order. So are you pro-Trump or anti-Trump, right? And so, and why it's kind of genius and why the Operation Hope guys, are focused on it is because we don't think Trump really meant it. And so it's kind of calling his bluff. And so, and that's a smart way to go and say, okay, if you meant lower drug prices, deal. We'll take yes for an answer. So, Ro, last thing on this, you've been doing a lot of media, and which is smart, and that's you got to get your message out, and you've been challenging leadership a little bit too, including a challenge of Chuck Schumer on an issue, et cetera. So, what's been the response? Is mainstream media a little bit more open to what you're saying here? Because if any of these things got national attention, again, they're all not based on, oh, I like them, but based on national polling, enormously popular initiatives.
Well, I appreciate it. I feel like I've been doing double media because I do it, and then I see you mention one of my policy proposals on all the podcasts you're doing and all the shows you're doing. So I appreciate that we're getting this out there. But you know what I found in candor, because I'm always straight. Initially I was a little more diplomatic, and I say, here's what I believe, and I wouldn't really call out Chuck Schumer, who spent a week trying to equivocate and not getting my war powers resolution or Kane's war powers resolution on the floor. And then I realized that if you actually just tell the truth and say, these leaders are actually not moving it, and you're willing to call them out, suddenly people's ears perk up, and they're like, okay, this guy has got the honesty to call out his own party. Maybe he's one of the more honest ones. Let me hear what he has to say. And so now I feel I've lost any inhibition. And if there's someone from our own party who's standing in the way, I just say it as I see it. I never engage in personal attacks. I never would say, someone is corrupt unless there's really a corruption or someone has a scandal. I just say the facts, and I think that that's really important. You start to build credibility when you're willing to call out people in the status quo.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, and then lastly, Zohran Mamdani just won the Democratic primary for the mayor's race. I mean, I don't know if you can tell. That was good. Look, the last post I had on X was, one of the results of this is that if AOC enters the New York Senate race, Chuck Schumer is going to drop out instantly. I mean, nobody wants to go out like Andrew Cuomo did. So what's your sense of that Senate race? If AOC gets in, do we think that Chuck Schumer probably says, it's been a good career, I appreciate everybody, and maybe steps down?
I mean, if he has any political sense, that's what he would do. I mean, this is, look, a New York Senate seat's a big deal. It's a seat that Robert Kennedy had, that Hillary Clinton had. It's a huge thing. And that's partly why Schumer clings to it. But I mean, it's amazing to me with Zohran's victory, how clear a path AOC has now to winning it. And I think if you're Chuck Schumer or you're one of the other people, and you have any political sense, you would see that. Why you'd want to lose is you can't explain human emotion, but I think it's becoming more and more obvious, and I think it probably gives progressives the courage to run, because the argument always used to be, well, okay, AOC's up in the polls, but they're going to dump $20 million and they're going to change the numbers. Well, they just tried that against Zohran. It didn't work. If anything, it backfired.
Yeah, they spent $25 million on a mayor's race and couldn't get the job done. In fact, yeah, his numbers went up, not down. So last thing to put a button on that. So if AOC runs in that Senate primary and Chuck Schumer stays in the race, you think AOC wins?
I think she wins. I think she wins decisively, and I think she gets support to do that. And my sense is, look, if we don't win back the Senate, I would not be surprised if you have other people say, look, I want to be leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate. And frankly, it would be shocking to me if others didn't step up to do that. I mean, part of the problem, I think, has been that the old guard has held on too long. But the one thing that Biden says, which is somewhat true. He's like, well, why did they run against me, right? I mean, it takes two things. It's like, okay, you want to step aside? Yes. But then you also need the other generation to say, yeah, I'm willing to run. And I would be shocked if someone doesn't step up and say, you know what, we can do better for Senate Minority Leader after 2026.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Representative Ro Khanna, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Always has novel ideas. And look, our motto is get caught trying, and you're one person in Congress that does that seemingly every day. So we appreciate it.
Appreciate your ideas.
All right. All right, guys. Operation Hope is next for some of you guys. Check it out on tyt.com/hope, and we'll see you tomorrow.